one of the most iconic cameras ever. That camera is Sony's very first A7. This is the Mark I. Yes, this is the one that started it all. The Sony A7 Mark I was released back in 2013. That is 11 years ago. I'm going to talk about the pros, the cons, and some surprising little features this camera has that makes it an amazing choice in 2024. Let's do this. The Sony A7 Mark I was a revolutionary camera of its time. It was one of the most groundbreaking cameras that came out. It was the first full-frame mirrorless camera. It changed the game by offering full frame quality in a tiny body, making mirrorless cameras finally a true competitor to DSLRs. This model laid the foundation for Sony's highly successful line of A7 mirrorless bodies, which is still leading the industry to this day. It's got a 24 megapixel full frame sensor, which was super impressive back in those days. The body is very compact and actually very lightweight for what it is. It makes for a great option if you're looking for a full frame camera. For the build quality of this camera, it's completely made out of magnesium alloy. This camera is built like a tank. But one thing though is that this is not weather sealed. So as you can see, the layout for this camera is actually quite simple. You have the mode dial here, you have a front control wheel here, and another one in the back here, and you have the exposure compensation. On the back, you have an extra wheel, which is right here, a few function buttons, the basic stuff that it comes with. And here there's a switch for auto exposure lock and autofocus and manual focus right here. For the ports, it has a micro USB that you can actually use to charge. It has a micro HDMI, which, bummer, those things are fragile and I don't like them. Surprisingly, this has a headphone and mic jack, so you can actually use this for pretty decent videos. I find that this camera, as it is the first one, they made it as simple as possible, because compared to the newer models, the A7 III, 4, 5, all of those, like those bodies are full of buttons and dials everywhere. Like they really give you the works with all of the features and the bells and whistles. But this one, all of the buttons are on one side and they're like not complicated at all. They all fall exactly where your fingers are supposed to go. And also, it just makes it a lot simpler to use the camera. All right, so the moment you've been waiting for. How is the image quality on this A7 Mark I body, a camera from 2013? Well, I have some good news. They are amazing. They are sharp, they are vibrant, they are fantastic. The images that I got from this camera are still just as good as any other cameras that came out in the past 5 years. Since this has a older sensor, the dynamic range is not as good as its newer brothers, but it's still pretty decent. With the raw files, you can actually pull out some pretty good details out of the shadows and even some out of the highlights. Keep in mind, this is like the foundation of all the other full frame cameras that Sony released. So all of the technology that they have now started from this, and the technology is not that bad. One cool thing that I love about Sony is that their cameras are easily adaptable with lenses. Here I have a, what is this? A Pentax Super Takumar 35mm f3.5. This is an M42 mount lens, so it's a screw mount, as you can see. There is a bunch of adapters that you can get for Sony mirrorless cameras, and that's so cool because with a bunch of adapters opens up a bunch of options and the horizon just becomes wider. So it's fun. This lens pairs really good with this camera. It doesn't extend too far out with the adapter, but I mean, it feels like a good size and the balance is pretty well on this camera. The color rendering of the photos are, I'm not gonna say film-like because it's not film, but it has like just these beautiful Sony characteristics to it. It has a more of like a Sony vintage vibe to it. This was their very first model, and the color science that they used for this one, I personally find that the colors coming out straight from the camera are actually so beautiful. And today, this is still one of the most portable and lightweight full frame body that you can get. It's great for on the go, like street photography or travel. It's really just a great little camera. Just to show you how small it is, I'm just gonna take off the lens here. This camera is that small. Like a full frame camera this small, that's insane. The newer ones, the newer models are thicker and bigger than its predecessors. So here are some photos that I've captured with this camera. And let me know what you think. I really loved and enjoyed using this camera. And without further ado, enjoy. So one of the cool things that it has is that it has 117 phase detection autofocus points. One of the downside is that it's not really the fastest and it's quite slow. Personally, that doesn't worry me at all because I'm using a manual lens with this. So I'm always focusing manually. If you do use it with autofocus lens, it will feel slow, a lot slower than the newer cameras of today, especially in low light. And that's unfortunate, but that's the technology of the time. The Sony A7 Mark I only shoots in 1080p. So no 4K in here. That's okay, honestly. I mean, a lot of the content that people consume, especially on their phone, are viewed in 1080p. If you're focused on photography, the 1080p is fine, but if you're more focused on video, no 4K is gonna feel a little bit limiting. Again, the camera is quite slow autofocus if you're gonna be doing video. And apart from that, like it does not have in-body stabilization. It doesn't really make for an incredible or amazing video camera, but it can do the job. Another downside to the camera is that the battery life is actually not so good. And if you're grabbing one, I highly, highly recommend that you carry multiple batteries. The batteries that it takes are these, what is this? NPFW50. And yeah, it doesn't really last long. It only holds 1,020 milliamp hours. I'll just briefly go over the pros and cons of the A7 Mark I. So let's start with the pros. Number one, the 24 megapixel image sensor on this camera is fantastic. I cannot emphasize how good the sensor on this is. Another pro is that it is compact and lightweight, which is a huge pro for a lot of people. Next is that this is actually a very, very affordable camera today, especially since it's quite old and Everyone is wanting to have the latest and greatest. This one, if you find one at a good price, take it, grab it. And last but not least, you can adapt a bunch of vintage lenses on this camera. And that's what makes it so versatile and so fun to use. Now onto the cons. The autofocus is not great, but it doesn't matter if you're using manual focus. Next is that the battery life is not so good as well. So make sure that you carry multiple batteries when you're using this camera. The camera only shoots in 1080p, so no 4K. There is no in-body image stabilization, so make sure that you either have a tripod or that your shutter speed is high enough to avoid those shaky images. And last but not least is that it only holds one SD card slot. And personally for me, that's not really a big problem, but I've heard that for people who has experienced corrupt memory cards, having dual memory card slot is such a clutch. Who is this camera for? I believe that this camera is perfect for beginners, especially because of how affordable it is. It's also perfect for those who are looking to begin their journey into full frame. This is the easiest way to enter into that new world of full frame. It's great for doing like landscape photography or still life. It's not so good for fast moving subjects, but it's still a very solid camera for all sorts of photography. And this camera is really made for anyone looking for an affordable and small full frame camera with beautiful color science and a compact body. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the shutter sound on this is so loud. Like, listen to this. Listen to that. Oh my goodness. Again. That is super loud and you can feel the camera vibrating. But like, it's not really that big of an issue. It just surprised me when I first started using it because I've used the Mark III and IV and V, and the shutters on those are like super soft. They're like a mouse's fart. This one feels like the clanging of axes on metal. Like, it's quite loud. Listen to this. But it has like a nice clunk sound to it. Anyway, just a little thing to note. So let me answer this final question. How does the Sony A7 Mark I hold up in 2024? Well, good news is that it still holds up really well. If you're not worried about autofocus, then you've got a really good camera on your hands. It is affordable, it is compact, and most importantly of all, it is accessible for everyone and anyone looking to start using full frame. It may not have all the bells and whistles of the newer models, but its affordable price makes it a bargain, a steal for a full frame camera. So that's the Sony A7 Mark I. My name is Steve, and thanks for watching. Peace. I want to give a huge shout out to my good friend Saif, who lent me this camera. I highly recommend you guys check out his stuff because he makes amazing videos and he uploads way more frequently than I do. Yeah, go check him out. He does a lot of walkabouts. He does a lot of deep dive into actual art of photography. So yeah.